support security. And, really the idea for this came about because in a lot of discussions that I have, although technology seems to be dominant with regards to the amount of time we spend talking about issues, I think the larger issue that doesn't get the attention it deserves is cultural issues, especially when it comes to security. There's a lot of cultural things, and we've heard this today in the innovation session, and throughout the course of the 3 days, we've had a lot of folks mention, people, processes, how we make decisions. I think Vaughn said, we have to stop saying, no, we can't, or to how do we do it. Right? These are all cultural issues, and they're very important. And regardless of how much, regardless of how much money you have and resources you have, if you don't have the right culture to support it, it's all for naught, and you will ultimately, fail. And so what we're going to do here is gathered a few thought leaders in this area to share some thoughts on cultural issues. And, please feel free to be interactive on this again. But it's really, not going to be so technology-focused, but really focused on what can we do from a non-technology issue to ultimately, again, improve our security posture. So let me quickly introduce our speakers. To my right is Mr. Dan Gragg, who's the Director of Security for the Department of the Navy Special Access Program Central Office. Assuming the duties and responsibilities in January 2002, he's responsible for security policy planning, supervising, organizing, and coordinating all matters relating to the national security architecture for the DONSAPCO? Was that? Don Sapco. And he directs a team of over 200 security professionals. To Dan's right is Lori Harrington, who is the Chief of Field Attachment Security Directorate at the Defense Contract Audit Agency. She has been with the DCAA since November of 2002 and is responsible for managing program support and security infrastructures in the execution of DCAA's contract audit services of classified and sensitive programs. And last but definitely not least, Mr. Pat Howard on the far right, who is the Director of the NRC Computer Security Office, reporting directly to the Deputy Executive Director for Corporate Management and the CIO, and provides vision, leadership, and oversight in developing and implementing NRC's agency-wide cybersecurity programs. Mr. Howard has worked for over 35 years in the security industry and has worked in the computer security field for the past 18 years. And Pat, you all know him. He's spoken at many of our meetings. So thank you guys for agreeing to do this. And to kick things off, Pat, I'm going to start with you. And just kind of to frame the context for the audience with regards to our current security environment, just kind of wanted you to take a stab at what do you think the biggest challenges are that we face as a community in order to get one step ahead of the bad guys. That seems to be we're always trying to play catch up, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
You have to understand what the bad guys are up to and have to be able to see them. That's the biggest challenge, I think, is just putting a face on the bad guy and knowing that it's not just an external threat we're dealing with, but sometimes the bad guys is right there on your network. Your own people causes problems with that. So keeping up is an issue. Most obviously these days, though, the budget is a challenge, trying to continue to maintain the security posture of an agency, in my case enterprise-wide, with less money. It continually goes down. You don't ever have enough to mature the program the way you want to, and now it's actually operating the other direction. I was just telling a couple of you earlier, we're having to make hard decisions about what we can't do anymore. We just don't have the dollars to fund everything. My program is about 3 years old. We're trying to achieve this, increase the maturity of the program every year. But we've got the point now where we've got to throw on the brakes and make some tough calls about what we can't do anymore. And, the choice is, do we stop doing a particular function, or do we take a slice across the whole organization, take, 10%? It's really hard to do. So that's two of the bigger challenges that I'm seeing. The one I would throw in there that's related is having talented people to be able to monitor what's going on. Someone said that at one of the earlier panels. It's not just the technologies. You got to do something with the data that those technologies provide you. So it takes good analysts that you can rely on. And those folks are in short supply. So that's just 3 out of a whole passel of challenges.
Absolutely. Lori, Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, you'll see when I answer my question, it's pretty much the same thing, if I can just dovetail right into it.
Sure.
Mine are, what are the greatest threats? What do I consider the greatest threats? It's very similar to the challenges. You know, the technology, to me, is one of the greatest threats. Keeping pace with that technology. Or matter of fact, we're not even able to keep pace any longer. You know, we have to mitigate the strategies as we go. The budget, you know, the budget is killing all of us. The idea is how do you maintain that? We have to do a better job of showing return on investment. You know, as long as we can do that, I think our budgets are safe. We're in a mindset now of taking vertical cuts, which, from our perspective in security, is a good thing rather than the slicing aspect. Vertical cuts, you know, hit everybody across the board, and, you know, along with those cuts, you know, go the responsibilities for it. And then probably the third largest threat I feel is workforce secession. You know, most of us are boomers. We're getting ready to leave. Do we have an adequate workforce behind us? 9/11 drained our talent pool, and we've been recovering since. Now, what I've done in my environment, I started growing our own. I started going to universities and colleges, and the only thing I asked my leadership was give me time to bring these folks up. I mean, it's a great pool of talent, or a great pool of individuals, but you can't teach experience and tenure. That's my biggest challenge in that regard. So I think I answered my own question with your...
And actually that dovetails into the next series of questions, which really comes down to people, right? You know, as we mentioned, really people is I think are the key to solving a lot of these challenges. And Lori, I know this is kind of an area of passion for you with regards to the skill sets needed and what kind of competencies we're looking for. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, and right into what Dan was talking about, having good people. I think in the security profession, for a long time, when you thought of a security person, and even today sometimes when I say I'm a security officer, the very first thing people think is that I'm the guard at the front of the door. And so a lot of the changing of the security profession is getting people that are buying into the technology, the changes that we're doing, and not putting our head in the sand because they don't understand. So I think when you're talking about security professions, you've got to have passion, I've seen a lot of that in the last couple days here with the people that are selling products that they're passionate about, networking, communicating, being able to articulate what's the threat, what do you need to fix it, and integrating, being able to integrate and be ready for the future of where we're going. So again, taking that profession from the guards to education and training. I really believe that security profession is changing and evolving as the technology is. So it's exciting. It's a very exciting time.
Absolutely. Any other comments on that? You know, go ahead.
Yeah, Laura reminded me of one thing. I think the vision that people had of the IT security techies in the past is pretty narrow. But in order to, in looking at this in cultural terms, I think we expect a lot more of IT security technicians these days. They have to be able to communicate a lot better now than they ever did before, because I think we're all educators in our business. We have to identify the threats, know the risks, be able to share those to change the culture. So it's not a matter of just being a good technician anymore. You have to have the soft skills in order to be effective, or in order to move up, to be able to make a bigger impact. The people that are able to speak to upper-level management about the threats, vulnerabilities, and risks, and you know, propose solutions are going to be more successful than those that just like to sit in their cube and, you know, analyze data.
And, you know, this is it wasn't really something we talked about, but you know, I think that that's one of the biggest challenges, is educating somebody how to be an effective communicator, and how to, a lot of times you hear it's a natural talent. Either you're dynamic and charismatic and people want to talk to you, or they don't. How do you address that? Because it seems like there's sometimes a contradiction when you think of, like you said, a technical person as an introvert versus a salesperson, which we're going to get to later, you know, selling and marketing is more an extrovert. So how can you overcome that challenge? Do you have any ideas, any of you?
Well, I think maybe one thing that works is stretch them. Don't allow them to stay in their little cubby hole. If you can cross-train them in another area, it helps them, but it also helps you. You got more depth on your staff if you're able to move over and start doing some compliance kind of work in addition to their situational awareness stuff, or give them a shot at training or policy, but incrementally expand their capabilities. And you really, as a manager, have to know the person pretty well and knows what's going to work for them, or what their logical progression is going to be. So I think just stretching a person and give them that path upward, a development plan.
Sure.
Well, both Pat and Lori are absolutely right in what we do. What I have done with my workforce, I have myself and 2 other individuals. We are the only people that hire our folks. And like I said, 98% of my workforce comes out of colleges and universities. Communication is key. We put them through a battery of interviews before we come in the door. The soft skills are so key in what we do. We have evolved from the guns, gates, guards, and dogs type of security of the past into it's a white-collar profession now. We've got to bring folks on and educate them in that fact. We, the components in DOD, as well as a lot of industry leaders, developed a course to well-round an individual. Not so much the security skills, a lot of the soft skills. Teaching them acquisition, FAR, DFAR, teaching them budget cycles, colors of money, things that are of value to program management. Teaching them earned value management, work breakdown structures, so they can sit at the table. And again, their return on investment to the people that are going to fund them has got to be huge, but they have to be able to communicate that. One of the key points that we drive when we hire somebody, I like type A personalities. They're hell to deal with, but they are very effective in communicating. So it's a lot of these things that we've had to evolve in to build our workforce of today and tomorrow.
Great. I was going to see if you had a comment. I think next we'll go to Pat. And Pat, this is something that you've mentioned to me a lot with regards to the role contractors play. And I kind of wanted to see, as we're talking about people, how does this whole dynamic of using contractors fit in with regards to your security strategies?
Well, it definitely fits in. I really rely a lot on contractors. I have about, I guess with me, 14 government employees, and probably have in the neighborhood of 20 full-time contractors supporting the IT security program. They have to be integrated within my staff. It has to be just one team working together. And that's where culture can make things complex. I worked at HUD, I worked at DOT, and now I work at NRC. At NRC, contractors don't really have much of a face, a voice. They only really respect government employees when they speak. So we have to work through that hurdle. I rely on contractors, but we have to be the face, but to the interface with them. It's different when I was with HUD. Contractors were at the table, and even more so at Department of Transportation 5 years ago. So culture has definitions for you in terms of how much authority and latitude, flexibility contractors have. But I think I rely on contractors a lot because they give me those technical skills that I need immediately. If there's a requirement comes up, it takes a while to train a government employee to be able to meet that requirement, whereas I can cut a task order and get a contractor in to deliver right away. So I think the operative word is partnership, and that's the only way it can function appropriately. If you just had my 14 people to rely on, we'd never get the job done.
Sure. Shifting gears a bit now, Dan, when we had our call with the team here, you mentioned something I thought was interesting, which we talked a lot about cultural diversity in the workforce and how that impacts the organization and the culture, and ultimately how you're able to secure. And I want you to kind of share your thoughts with the audience on that.
Sure. Again, cultural diversity, it's really a changing of mindset. When we were coming up, there was, I think it was what's coined the silent era. I call them the post-depression era. They made the rules. We as boomers followed them. And rite of passage comes along where we make the rules. The generation, the X-Gen, follows them. But what we started running into was, and again, technology has forced this, generations are running further and further, I guess collapsing is a better word. What was normally taking 12 to 15 years in between these cultural generations went down to 12 years, down to 9 years. And I think right now we are between 4 and 5 years. We for the first time, when we were coming up, we basically had two generations. Like I said, the silent era and the boomers. Now we have the boomers, the X gen, the Y gen, the millennials, the I generation, and it's growing at exponential rates. It's growing at the same rate of technology. These folks coming in don't understand why we can't provide them with the tools that they're accustomed to. You know, IT was a learned profession or a learned skill for most of us. Well, I should say, I remember when there was no computers. My first computer, I think, was a Lexitron or a Videc or maybe a Thermofax machine. I don't know. But, yeah, what is that? The idea of telling, and the new folks coming online, their iPods, their iTouches, their iPhones, their droids, they're extensions of themselves. We have to do a better job of bringing their cultures into our line of decision-making. The idea that we need, well, I would profess for a long time, my managers need to understand these younger generations. That's the only way we're going to create the teamwork we need. But on the flip side, and conversely, they need to understand how we think as boomers, which is night and day between the way they're used to operating and the way we operate. We just have to do a better job of educating the generations, because ultimately it will take care of itself. We're probably faced with the biggest challenge, because we see this wide range of diversity. But as these cultures collapse, they'll run into each other. I don't think there will be generational gaps, because they're happening so frequently. Everyone is in touch with that. I know my managers, they're a lot out of the X-Gen. But, you know, they're very comfortable with their droids and their iPads and iTouches because they've seen this technology. The Ys that come on, it's, you know, they understand that change is inevitable. Change happens, and change happens fast, and they can't wait to see the latest and greatest thing on the market, which is a lot different than the way we operate, or at least the way that I'm accustomed to operating. So, big challenges. I think we're well on our way to accommodating it. If we just have time, it's a self-correcting problem in my judge.
Yeah, and you know, I think that another ramification of not addressing it is from a recruiting perspective, because you know, culture, a lot of folks, especially the young generation, anybody, when you're looking where you want to get a job, you ask around, you look at the culture, and if there's not a culture that supports that kind of collaboration between the different generations, you know, out of college, you're not going to even consider that type of an organization. You're trying to recruit the youngest, hungriest, talented workers. They're not even going to consider it, and I think that's another you know, implication of that.
Well, let me add one thing. When we've developed an intern program that we operate, and I've started with people in their senior year, bring them in. However, I'm in a closed environment. I'm in the Intel community. Everybody that walks through the door has to have a top secret SCI access and a string of other things. Trying to get people in the door is really tough. But going to a college and a university and explaining to them, IT profession, that's pretty, you can identify with that. Telling them, do you want to be a security professional? You know, they think of the guy that hands us smiley faces out of Walmart. I mean, my son thought I carried a nightstick and a flashlight around because that's all he knew what I did. But trying to explain to them, you know, the type of job they're going to have. We've been working with D&I, who have built academic programs for security professionals. We've been working with them at Eastern Kentucky and Embry-Riddle out in Arizona. But one of their biggest challenges is, okay, this degree program is in place. How do you convince a high school student or a freshman to move down to a path of security? It's not, you know, it doesn't sound very glamorous. So how do you sell that? I've extended my intern program to bringing in sophomores, juniors, and seniors. I bring them in at the sophomore level, so I interview them at a freshman. I'm not sure, this is the first time I've gone down to the freshman level to interview. The dynamics of interviewing somebody that age is interesting. But we bring them in when we get them accessed, cleared, bring them in the door in their sophomore year. They usually work one semester with us and then the summers. But what that does is it gives me 3 years to evaluate them. And, I bring them into the GS4 very low, but it is a paid internship program. They do get credit for the work they do. But the advantage that I have, it's a double-edged advantage for them. One, by the time they graduate, I know whether I want to hire these folks or not. And two, after 2 to 3 years doing this, they know that they want to make security a profession. It's not a hit or miss thing when you hire somebody cold. They may not like the job and they're gone in a year or two, or they're miserable at it. But these kids, I got to get away from kids. These folks understand that that's what they want to do, and it really has been paying a lot of dividends. And I've been asked by a lot of different agencies. OSD, I'm bringing in some interns for USDI and USDP. I'm bringing some in for the Air Force. I'm bringing a number in for the DNI through this intern program. But I think that's my strategy to work our succession planning for some time to come. And I'm happy to say it does work well. My retention rate of these folks is running at about 97%.
Oh.
So I think that's huge, at least of the folks we bring in from universities. I think I've lost one to the calling. She became a minister, which can't argue with that. One was doing a review out in Sonoma. She left to go grow grapes, and God bless her. I lose very few people that go out of the security profession. Sorry, didn't mean to.
So he hired a couple of your folks while he was here, did you?
Yeah, right? Especially after a Sunday night when I got grilled like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of those pirates. Marketing, I think going off on what Dan's saying, when you talk about marketing, how do you market security? How do you make it an extension of what we do? There's some aspects of bringing it, the profession's different. How do you get that young talent and market it to them? Academia, education, great opportunity to do it there. And then the next level is how do we apply security every day? And I think for the most part, in a lot of ways, we've not really done a very good job at that. Most of even the IT folks will tell you that security folks tend to gripe about the fact that you called me after it was too late. And a lot of that is because we're not embedded in the process from the very beginning. That's our responsibility. We need to market it. We need to set at the table as they're building these things. So even these last couple of days, really great opportunity for us to be able to discuss with industry, our partners, on where are we going, and we need to understand that. So if you're going to market yourself, and let me tell you, you guys did a great job at marketing. So when you're selling something, I can see that you're passionate about what you're doing, but there's got to be a way ahead. There's got to be a direction, and we can't all be going different directions. So I think that coming together, networking like we've been doing here, security has to become an extension of what you're doing. And it's interesting, I see our safety guys still here. One of the best sales campaign, how many people wear their seatbelt when they get in the car? How many definitely make their teenagers wear them when they're driving? So, the seatbelt, it isn't foolproof. You can have an accident and not survive just because you have your seatbelt on. But this is a campaign that we've had. The industry's bought into it. We obviously buy into it. It's simple. It's an extension. You get in the car, you put the seatbelt on, and somehow security reform has to be something that it's just one of those things that you add in every single day. It has to be something that's applicable, simple, and reasonable to apply. So those are some areas that you talk about security marketing. That's the type of things we need to come up with.
I think that's really the primary path of building a security culture, or better said, to integrate security into the pre-existing culture. We all have to sell it. We all have to be marketeers. I would say in my culture, we're just kind of tolerated. Everybody knows you got to do security these days, thanks to FSMA and for some other reasons. But how do you break through that? How do you move to a higher level where people are doing security, as Lori says, as part of their routine? And I think that's where we've all heard the mantra about enabling the business and adding value. I think to move up, we have to demonstrate in a little bit clearer terms how we're helping. And where we fall down is we sometimes don't see the value ourselves in what we're doing. We should be sharing information about the kinds of attacks that we're seeing and the effectiveness of our tools. I think it's better for them to see information like that where they can see the threat, the real threat through it, rather than just a binder, a CNA package, which they're paying for. They don't see a whole lot of value in that. They just see, you're the traffic cop, you're making me do this. So I think we have to take a critical look and try to find ways of demonstrating our value when we talk to higher management, vertically, but also horizontally to those managers elsewhere in the department.
And I think that also comes in, when you think about that, to be effective, it comes down to how you communicate and looking at your audience. Because if you're talking to the business side of the house, you're talking about from a technology perspective may not have an impact. But if you say, if you don't do this, you may end up on the front page of the Wall Street, Washington Post, saying that you had a breach and, you get in trouble and your boss is upset. That may make them pay attention, listen up. So the marketing and selling of security is important for recruiting, but also I think for getting buy-in and the resources that you want from the people holding the purse string, so to speak. We're going to kind of change focus here right now, and I always want to make sure that we don't just talk about problems, but try to talk about some solutions, which is why we're here. So the final couple questions are really just trying to talk to these folks about what they've been implementing and how they've been achieving some successes. And Dan, I want to ask you, just pretty basically, what strategies you employ to counter threats in today's culture and environment.
Well, mine's somewhat easier. I work in a closed networks. We don't traditionally have a lot of successful attacks on our processes. However, where the strategies I'm looking at today, it's very easy to tell people, no, you can't do certain things. A lot of the folks, especially the younger generations, want to bring their iPods, their iTouches, their cell phones, their droids into our spaces. The answer is no, they don't come in. In today's environment, we are in an e-business world, and it's only going to get more e-business. Our entire enterprise is going to be the flow of electrons. Sooner or later, that's going to be the only way to conduct business. We are going to have to start thinking of ways to allow connectivity to touch these closed systems. I know right now, I was talking to my brethren up at NSA, there's no way, it's never going to happen, never going to happen. A lot of things were never going to happen. The way technology is moving, there was a Ray Kurzweil. Has anyone ever heard of Ray Kurzweil? Yeah. I did a presentation on something he had talked about the evolution of cyber about 10 years ago to a security forum. These were all senior leaders in security. And it was about 45 minutes, and they would just look at me like, you're crazy. This will never happen. But he talks about, by the year 2010, but he was saying by the year 2030, we will have evolved into something equivalent to machine intelligence, a.k.a. the Matrix. And when I said that, it was like a deer in headlights. But you know what? I'm beginning to believe that now. The takeaway is, I think we need to start embracing connectivity into all of our business processes. And what Pat was saying, the easy answer is to say no, but we're not, saying no is not the right answer anymore. Technology is moving at such a fast pace. Companies out there are building bigger and better things. And sure, we could go, as a matter of fact, we have tried going to Microsoft, Apple, saying, hey, could you build these safeguards into the system? They say, the government is such a small market to them, it's not worth their effort. So that leaves us trying to keep pace with the technology out there, and it's tough. And being in an IT position is not an enviable position, in my opinion. But, we've got to move forward with this. We've got to think of better ways to do this. We've got to do a better job of risk management. what really is important. You know, right now we try to protect everything. Can't do that anymore. You know, we have to assess the risk and determine the outcome. You know, is it going to be a catastrophic event if something is lost, or is it recoverable? It's just a different mindset we have to look at in today's environment, because it's only going to get more complicated.
Great, thank you. Lori, if you can answer what cultural changes need to be made to affect security reform, and more importantly, I think, how realistic is it to actually make those changes?
Well, I like the realistic part of it because it's going to happen no matter what. So to Dan's point, you've got to embrace the change. You've got to be forward-thinking, because at some point we won't have telephones on our desks that have a cord. We know that. We don't have them at home anymore. These are all things that have already changed in the commercial world, and it will eventually catch up with the government or federal or whatever. But I think the other interesting thing about technology, and I used to work with a counterpart in the Soldier System Command. So those of you that have done any work with the Army, about 10 years ago, as all these great ideas came, night vision goggles, new helmets, uniforms that changed colors depending on heat, all these great industrial ideas, boots that warmed their feet or whatever the case may be, they came up with just tons of things that they were going to put on the soldier in order to make them better, weapons that shot around the corner. So at the end of the day, what happened was the soldier couldn't move. He was overloaded. He had way too much technology on his back. So I think we need to balance that. We have to balance. We don't want to cripple the system, but we need to recognize that we are going to move forward, and eventually maybe we do want that soldier to shoot around the corner. Those may be technology that we need. How do we define exactly what we need and move smarter as a team? And I think that becomes a reality at some point.
Sure. Absolutely. Pat, I want to talk to you about cybersecurity legislation. Now, we talked about this a bit last night, and Rob Roy kind of had some comments on that. But one is, your thoughts on how effective is the legislation that we have? Where is it going? Is it going to get better?
I think what we have, when I hear you say what we have, I think of FSMA. That's the primary driver in our space, I think, at least in the federal government. And I think that's been pretty effective. There's not too many employees or contractors you'd talk to today that doesn't know what FSMA is. So it's been around for a few years, so people do know what FSMA is and what it means in terms of IT security. So that's kind of helped foster a culture of security to a large degree. A lot of that's been kind of misdirected, though. It's interesting that people are not talking about replacing FSMA. It's ingrained in what we do. What they're trying to do now in Congress, I guess, is probably to tinker with it a little bit, to fix the broken parts, if you will. I think FSMA has been fairly successful. The difficulties we've had in implementing it, though, are simply that, in the way it was implemented, the way that scores were kept, and all those kinds of things. I think you can do a whole lot on the implementation side rather than trying to fix things in Congress. They have their role. I don't think it's to get down in the trenches with us, though. I think there has to be some sort of a buffer in between. This is where DHS can play a role. And NIST has done a good job of defining things. I think there was some a lacking of that kind of guidance in the first couple of years of FSMA, and we probably made some missteps by focusing so much on system security as opposed to risk management, as Dan was talking about. That's come several years later. So I don't know, I'm kind of rambling here, but I think that there's a role for legislation. I don't think that FSMA is badly broken. I think that we can fix a lot of the issues with legislation now with FSMA, perhaps some of the others through smart implementation of those rules, interpretation of what the requirements are. But my fear to some extent is that they're going to get too deeply involved, too prescriptive, that would tie the hands of us at the agency level and prevent us from managing risk appropriately. And that could result in a whole lot of wasted resources. So that's my take on it.
Sure. You know, one thing I noticed on the vendor side, we've talked a lot over the past few days about the need to trust our service providers and the cloud vendors and whatnot. And one thing I noticed and been reading about recently, I think another issue with legislation is that there's a lot of state-specific legislation, and a lot of these companies are spending so much time meeting state-by-state requirements that those resources are being kind of wasted in a way, and there's not a lot of consistency. And one thing that's starting to happen, I think, on the Hill right now, you hear people talk about is trying to create a national type of legislation for different type of security issues, not for the federal government, but for vendors, which I think will ultimately help as well. Last question, I think, to all the panelists before we break for lunch is, you know, if you could, we'll start here with Dan and go down the row. And if everyone can just, you know, say what your biggest takeaway you'd like the attendees to leave with would be. If they remember one thing from this, what should it be?
Probably the fact that we're all change agents. Change is inevitable. We have to be able to make that change and communicate that to the policymakers or whomever it is. But we all have to be willing to change and work that amongst the rest of us and not allow the Machiavelli principle to play into our environment anymore.
So I'm going to add integration. So we spent the last couple of days talking to a lot of the vendors and the industry partners, and almost everybody had a solution for something, maybe a couple things, but at the end of the day, you're not going to walk away with every one of those products. So how do we collectively come up with a solution that becomes an extension, that becomes the seatbelt, easy to put on, it makes sense, it manages the risk, and we don't get overloaded like the soldier with all these gee whiz things that maybe at the end of the day we can come up with some collective solutions that we can use our resources on too, because we absolutely are at a different era in terms of trying to save money and make sense with what we're doing. So I think that would be my biggest takeaway on both parts. How can we integrate these things?
Yeah, I'd second both of those comments, but particularly on being a change agent, I think the role of the CISO is focused on that. But my guidance would be that the CISO has to work within the existing culture to affect change. To me, the first 90 days in a new organization or a new position is, and speaking as coming in as an outsider, is really learning how the agency works and what that culture is. One of the examples at NRC, we work collegially. We collaborate on everything, and that's good on one hand, but it takes time on the other. Now, if I don't understand that, then I'm going to be bumping my head up against the wall, because I come from a military background where it's very authoritarian. You know, what the boss says, that goes. That doesn't work at NRC. So things like that you have to understand up front, or you're going to be wasting a lot of your time. So the CISO, the security manager, has to design that program in order to map to the culture, to support it, and over time to change it and build security into it. That's my takeaway.
Terrific. And the only thing I would add is one thing that came up in the discussion as well that wasn't mentioned yet is I think I mentioned it earlier, was our decision-making processes. And historically, it's been a top-down model with regards to how we respond to incidents and how we who has the authority to act. And I think that with zero-day threats and the immediacy with which responses need to happen, we need to start assessing how we make decisions, who we authorize to make decisions. I kind of use the example of the Secret Service, who's protecting the president. If a gun comes out, they don't radio and say, do I do something? They're authorized and trained and trusted to make a decision, make a call, and do it. And I think that we have to start changing our kind of decision-making models as well with regards to security to kind of have that same mentality. We have just a few minutes left before we break for lunch. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Yes, Brad.
This is for Dan. I read recently, I actually think yesterday, a blurb in one of the emails I received that the Department of Navy is offering quantitative tuition to both Department of Navy employees, civilian employees, as well as military for graduate studies in information security. And I guess I saw that, I was like, wow, I wish I worked for the Department of Navy.
There you go.
couple things that we collectively have done. And I'll address the tuition secondly, but over the last 9 years, we've been developing a certification program for security professionals. And this is something we've done in concert with all of the components in DoD, as well as the industry leaders. Matter of fact, the governance board contains 4 industry and 4 government, and these are people very passionate about getting this certification process, which will allow standardization and reciprocity. And the takeaway that we put is, if you attain this either journeyman or master level certification, which is what we want to drive for our acquisition programs. If I have an ACAT-1 or ACAT-1 program or a major weapons platform, I may want a master level security professional. Smaller ones, it allows us to determine the scope of the project and the qualifications of the individual. You know, for instance, I've got 200 plus people that work in my directorate. But if I'm hiring for a position and I have one of my folks applying and I have somebody from the Air Force or one of the other components come to me and they have a master level certification or a journeyman, I know exactly what that individual has. And it is a set of standard curriculum that we've developed. And it's much like a degree program, but it's very security centric. So that allows us to at least try to craft our workforce in a specific way. Now, as far as the tuition, what you're talking about is a non-CIO. I'm in the special access enclave, so ours are a little different. But the Navy treats tuition assistance very liberally, and I fund a lot of my folks for their master's programs. And yes, it's costly, but in the long term it's not, because I get a 3-to-1 ratio for every year that they attend are working towards their degree. I get 3 years of them after. So, you know, if they're in a 2 or 3 year program, I have them for an additional 6 to 9 years after they graduate. The return is significant versus trying to train somebody train somebody all over. That to me is one of the key things that I don't want to do. That's why it's so important. We've got a huge investment in people before they even walk in the door. And every year they're there, the investment that we put into these people in training and experience is trying to understand the dollar figures. It's mind-boggling. You know, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace an individual. The old analogy that, you know, everybody's replaceable, that's a bunch of crap. Sure, they're replaceable. They're going to cost you a fortune to replace. So, you know, anything we can do to do that, to get standards, to get certifications, to move people in the academic world, we really want to push that. I know that's a long-winded answer for what you ask, and I hope I hit some part of what your question was.
The question kind of is, you're doing a good job of making that happen. How do we that leverage? What's that?
Leverage.
I mean, how? Because, I mean, it's not just about DoD anymore, and it's about all
Industry.
levels. And it's not just speaking to government, it's private industry as well. So how do we leverage what DoD has done and make that more pervasive throughout that system?
Cooperation. You know, even in DoD, like I said, I work a lot with DNI, and that handles all the intelligence communities. Now, as far as the other agencies, you know, I really don't know how to crack that particular nut. Working, you know, with the folks in NRC or over at, actually we are working with DHS to some extent now, but, you know, getting all the government agencies, that's tough. It's tough for the DoD entities to sit down and talk.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
Let me jump in on that. You know, even though it is like herding cats, the video we saw yesterday, and I love that one. That's kind of what it is out in the civilian government side, but we all look to DOD. We saw what was successful there, and it's pretty easy for us to see, yeah, we should kind of follow that. We should pay more attention to certifications and making sure we have those professional credentials. We can do that on our own. To move above that and try to coordinate across, or have a program like DOD has on the civilian government side, I don't know if that's in the cards or not.
Yes.
I don't know if anyone's aware of National Science. I've got my entire staff that's from the National Science Foundation. They have a program where you get a security professional. They have to do 2 years for the government. The National Science Foundation pays for them to get their master's. So they have to work for 2 years for the government. So you have that person for 2 years. You just pay them. They come in the door. I just lost one, but I've got 2. My staff, all 3 of them, just came in the door. They knew more than I did about security. You just have to kind of, like Pat said, teach them the government part, the aspects of how to deal with people. But it's a program, and you get them their training. How I try to keep them is I paid for 2 of them to get their CISSP. So my goal is to keep them there past 2 years. I've got 2 of them that are past 2 years. The one that left, he followed his girlfriend. and one of them.
You can't win that one.
Yeah, you can't call that.
It's a tremendous program. These guys and they have graduating class coming up in January, so I'm already working with them to get a replacement. But I mean, they come in the door and they know what they're doing.
Best practices.
Great.
But actually, those, like Lori just said, are best practices that we can probably work with, discuss, but as far as sitting down at the table and trying to craft joint languages, it's tough. I'm a member of the DSTC, the Defense Security Training Consortium, and it's all of the entities within DOD, and OMG, it is impossible to get anything done on that process. We, between the 3, real quickly, between the 3, Service, Army, Navy, Air Force, DOD was lacking standard regulatory materials, so we created what we call the JFANs. It was for the 3 services. But through the lack of any kind of policy development at the OSD level, OSD follows them now. Matter of fact, the last holdout, USDI, said that they would follow our JFANs until documentation was published. DARPA follows them. NASA follows them. MDA. But we're in the process now of creating DOD documents, really just taking what we've created for the 3 services, which everyone's following, making them DOD publications. We've been working on that for about 3.5 years. And it's because I just got an email today. We're having another meeting on one of the volumes on Thursday. There must be 25 people coming to this meeting. You don't get anything accomplished. More is not better. So, long story, I don't see a lot of joint efforts. People are just afraid to sit down with that many people. You really don't accomplish a lot.
All right. We have time for one more question, yeah?
It's not a question, it's just a comment back as I think there's another dimension here that is probably missing. It's out there, but it's missing in this conversation here I'm not hearing. And that is the fact that we get a lot of military members into industry, into private industry on an internship or an externship opportunity occasionally. And they come in, they'll spend a quarter with us or 6 months with us, and then go back to their active duty position sometimes. I think that that's a capability that is missing, where the government can actually reach out to industry and say, give us your best and brightest, come in. And besides the academic training that you get with a master's degree, investing in that, those type of degrees, there's actually other type of education and awareness that's going on in the real world beyond the academic side that would be beneficial to the government side, bring those people in, not as contractors, but maybe on an externship kind of program.
Sure.
That's absolutely right. We're actually looking at that now.
Yeah, and last question? Okay.
I think maybe something that would work immediately is
rounds. One final one. All right, I promise. Go ahead.
Hire a contractor.
All right. Thanks for all the great comments. We are running a bit over. So, panelists, thank you very much. And lunch is served in the back corner. Please help yourselves and sit down and enjoy.